Joining me, everyone, Charles Moskowitz here. Um, Michael D. Shaw will be my guest in about an hour, but before that, I thought I'd warm up a little bit here and swing open the phone lines, maybe do some rapping, as it were. 508 637. Let me just improve the lighting. I look like a squirrel a little bit. Hold on. No, that's the best I'm going to get. Okay. It's like they used to say that about Nixon, right? He had like a 5 o'clock shadow. All right, but so be it. Anyway, 508 637 5596. And let's go live on Podomatic. Podomatic. Here we go. Welcome aboard, Podomatic. Welcome to the program, Charles Moskowitz Live. And I'm taking calls in advance of Michael Shaw joining me at the 3 o'clock hour. I will be announcing soon the lineup that tomorrow I have as a special guest, an Israeli captain who is going to be giving me some insight into what is going on. My main interest with regard to Israel is what is happening in Israeli society. How are the people feeling? How is everything holding up there? I mean, after the atrocity of October 6th, and with the ongoing clouds of war from Iran, from Hezbollah, what is the daily, everyday life for Israelis? How are they feeling? I want them to know that they have a lot of supporters out there, and there are a lot of people who love Israel, like myself, and something that's overlooked by them. The other topic I want to discuss, obviously, and the main topic, is the upcoming election. I've said this on my TikTok, and I'll say it here. I'm not one who thinks that there's going to be huge calamity and tragedy and a catastrophe if Harris is elected president. I think that, in fact, probably one of the biggest things that Harris has going for her in this election is that the American people tend to like what Warren G. Harding called normalcy. They don't want major change. They don't like drama. And Donald Trump brings a lot of drama, let's face it. They want to have things at an even keel in terms of public life, mainly because the primary focus of the American man and woman and family is their own life. And the less they can hear of this gnashing of teeth nationally in this drama, the better. And so I think that this sense of inertia is probably the biggest thing that Harris has going for her in this election, besides the possibility of electoral fraud, which I'm not going to get into, mainly because the show is running live on YouTube and on TikTok, and that's a foreboding subject. So if you want to hear my interviews on that topic, and you want to hear what I've exposed over the past 4 years on that topic, I would direct you to my Rumble channel. By the way, speaking of Rumble, I am very disgusted to hear that Dunkin' Donuts, of all people, are threatening to pull their advertising from Rumble unless Rumble purges and censors conservative influencers and conservative opinion makers, and that would obviously include me. So for that reason, and I'm sorry to have to say this because I love Dunkin' Donuts, I'm not going to deny, I'm going to be boycotting Dunkin' Donuts until they change that policy. So And just thought I'd put that out there. I hope that people might consider doing the same. They want to censor speech. They want to censor opinion, and that's wrong. You can't do it. It's just not the American way. I don't know. They think they're kissing up to. Yeah. Okay. Look, I'm live on the website. Let's see where else I'm live. I'm just checking this here. Am I live on Rumble? Let's see. Rumble. Yeah. Yeah. There we go. Live on Rumble. What about? Okay. What about the other one I have going live is Rockfin. Let's see if I'm live on Rockfin. Rockfin. By the way, my website is charlesmoskowitz.com. And there we go. Starting soon. Where is it? Let's go. Let's go. Let's go. Oh well. Says starting soon. We'll see what happens. Um, Let me just see. All right, we'll leave it at that. Hopefully that goes. Anyway, so I think that, as I mentioned, the factor that the Harris campaign has going for it is this sense of inertia. People just like to have everything stay the same, and Donald Trump does tend to stir people up, and that in a way is both his strength and his weakness. Having said that, it does seem to me that the strategy being employed, and again, I'm not getting into the issue of voter irregularities and ballot irregularities. That's there too, and that hasn't changed, and that's a big one. I do think there are people working on that, by the way, particularly at the Republican National Committee. People like Laura Trump and Glenn Youngkin and others. It's not going to be so easy this time around, but I'm going to put that issue aside. I want to talk about the horse race a little bit more here. And it seems to me that the strategy is on the Harris part is to do the same sort of game that Biden did in 2020, and that is to do nothing. Biden literally stayed in his basement the whole time, gave an interview to Cardi B. That's about it. No press conferences, no media discussions, no questions. If people asked him questions as he got on and off the plane, he would basically keep walking. And he was able to get away with that because the media is so corrupt in this country and so in the tank that they let him do that. They covered for him, and they covered after the election too, because they have this, in most cases, irrational hatred for Trump. And also because your average media hack doesn't want to lose their job because they know that if they say something good about Trump or if they get a little tough on Harris, there'll be repercussions. There's no longer this idea of a free press or running down the middle. That's generally been the stance of the media. None of them have the courage to step forward and do even the most basic, simple thing, which is to ask questions of the candidate. We have somebody who wants to join. All right. Let's see. Yep, you're invited. Okay. And so basically, they're playing the same playbook that Biden had, which is to do nothing, to speak in very broad, euphemistic, indirect doublespeak. I mean, what French scholar Elaine Benescon called the totalitarian language. In other words, to say nothing and to say it beautifully. Of course, in the case of Biden, he couldn't even do that. I don't think Harris can either. But the point I'm making here is, I think it was Clinton's Secretary of Health and Human Services, Donna Shalala, went on, I think, to be president, I believe, of the University of Wisconsin, who famously said that she realized that the secret to being a successful secretary in Washington was to say nothing and to say it beautifully, right? And that's sort of what they do. And so Harris has not given a single press conference. She's not answered a single question. Not that anyone is going to throw any kind of a difficult question her way. They're not going to let any opposition media go anywhere near her. You think Fox News or Newsmax or OAN are going to get a reporter to get anywhere near Harris? This isn't like Trump, who didn't mind, who would have people come. I mean, look at that reporter, completely bashed him around the head in Chicago. I mean, he brings them on. He goes there, steps in the lion's den, and they're like, "So, how is it that you, a wife beater and a pervert and a whatever, gets to run for president?" I mean, he couldn't get worse. And Trump was fine. He handled it with aplomb, actually. He's experienced at it. But in the case of Harris, no one is going to get near her in this entire election. They're going to keep her under wraps. They're going to keep moving. They're going to keep talking in platitudes. And they're going to keep the ball rolling until election day. She stands for nothing. She has, at least publicly, if you take a look at her actual record and her public utterances, I would think it's safe and fair and accurate to describe her as a radical leftist. Here we got BB. Why should they, especially if they're going to steal the election again? Well, I'm not going to get into that because I'm live on YouTube here and I'm live on TikTok, and they're going to shut the show down. But you said this, not me, okay? Not that that's going to do me any good. Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's they'll do anything they have to do to pull her over the finish line, and I think that that's the world we're in now, and they're going to make no bones about it. They'll do it in broad daylight. I want to avoid that subject. I want to stick to the horse race here, which is basically that she's as far to the left, I think, as any candidate has been in American history, maybe with the exception of Eugene Debs, who ran in 1920. And then she has the opportunity to pick a vice president. And normally, candidates for major parties will pick a vice president that they think is going to help them in the general election, which is to say, someone who has some contrast to them politically, someone who comes from the state which is critical or a region that's critical. I mean, there are reasons why they will pick a certain a type of candidate. Kennedy picked Lyndon Johnson because Kennedy was perceived as a kind of an Eastern Seaboard liberal, and he wanted to have a candidate from the South, from Texas, who could be perceived as a little bit conservative, even though Lyndon Johnson was not that. It was a perception, right? I mean, I don't know who else. I mean, Johnson picks Hubert Humphrey, a Midwesterner, kind of a seems conservative, even though he wasn't. We could go on. I mean, who was it? Nixon. Well, Agnew maybe could peel off a few votes from the border states. He's from Maryland. I mean, I don't know. I mean, Carter. I mean, Carter. That's another story. But the point I'm making here is that you have a balancing of the ticket, a perception of representation from different regions and ideologies. So, which is why I would have thought that Harris would have picked somebody like Josh Shapiro. Now, I have heard it said, I have no idea, I'm not an insider, that people didn't want to run with her, and so she couldn't get too many people. Eventually, it came down to 3 people. And the reason why I would wonder she didn't pick Josh Shapiro is because as a Jew and also as someone who has a record of being very pro-Israel to the point where I believe after college he did a volunteer stint in the Israeli Defense Forces, very pro-Israel. They can't have that in the Democratic Party. Too controversial. Too many people are polling, I think it's something like 40% of Democrats are at least ambivalent toward Israel, if not anti-Israel. And so for that reason, and plus they don't want to have disturbances in Chicago at the convention from all these radical pro-Hamas people. And so Shapiro was out. And I think that it's sad because it's kind of, there probably will not be another Jew considered by the Democratic Party for that reason. And I don't know a lot about Shapiro. I'm sure he's liberal, but he's also some. You would think that she would have picked him, but instead she picked this radical leftist out of Minnesota, and it was a disaster. And I think that you could say that this is going to be a win for the Trump side. I hope. Now, Trump, right now, as I speak, is giving a press conference in Mar-a-Lago. Let me just see if I can get some of that. Maybe we can get some volume, okay, let me just look that one up. All right. By the way, you can call in 508 637 5596 is the number. Let's see if there's no, I'm not getting Trump's. Wait a minute, let me just see here. Let me get to the Gateway Pundit. They'll probably carry this. Are they carrying it? Let's see. I don't see it. Okay. Well, let's see if something pops up here. It might be actually on, let's see, maybe it's on Rumble. My good friends over at Rumble. Let's see. Okay. Let me go to Rumble. Don't know if I see that. Let's see. Rumble, Rumble, Rumble. Do we have Trump? Yes. Here we go. Okay, let's see if we hear anything. This is live from Mar-a-Lago, by the way. Glad that Trump is sticking to the issue. He has to stick to the issue, stick to the script. If he does that and he stays safe, he's going to win a landslide. Oh my god. Trump looks tremendous, by the way. Check this out, it's on Rumble. It's on the right side broadcasting network. Hmm? What's happened? Oh, he's taking a question. Oh, that's refreshing. By the way, you can chat with me at Rumble, and you can call 508-637-5596, 508-637-5596. How do you justify Trump calling Epstein a good guy? What, he said that 10 years ago? He probably didn't know. That was before Epstein had. I don't think there's any evidence that he went to Epstein's Petro Island. I'm sure if he had, we'd know about it by now. We know that Clinton went there, I think, about 40 times. So no, I don't know. You know, you're going to take some one comment out of context and make an issue. That's how they always try to get Trump. That's hogwash. Okay, let's see. Hmm. The same ones that no, I don't think they did. As I've said, if there was something there, we would have heard nothing about front page headlines about that day after day. We would have never heard the end of it. So no, I don't think so. I think that Trump ended up kicking Epstein out of Mar-a-Lago after one of his employees complained about him. So no, that's not an issue. Sorry. Yeah, I didn't see that on the headlines anywhere. Show me that. Send me a link. Charles Moskowitz at gmail.com if you want to send me any information. I'll look it over. Yeah, sure. Let's see it. 508-637-5596 is the number. You're welcome to join the program. Or you can text me at TikTok or at Rumble. And there we go. Oh, I know, really. If she can't take on the media, how is she going to take on Putin? I mean, really. Oh, man. Mhm. Look at this. Trump is taking questions from hostile media. Okay, we're having trouble taking a question right now. Great. So Trump will be on Monday night with Elon Musk. How many people are watching this? 528,000. Wonderful. Ah, Move on to other subjects, Mr. President, please. Whatever. Okay, so this is a press conference with President Donald J. Trump at Mar-a-Lago. I'm tuning into it just because it's historic. He's taking questions. Great. Trump looks great. 508-637. God. You know, we Jews are very sensitive about criticism, especially when it comes to when it's lodged by a non-Jew. It's like we get our backup. You know, we feel like, oh, but in the case of Donald Trump, he's right. And he's saying the same thing I've been saying for years. Oh, the threat to us will not be from our own government now, but from immigrants. I hope not. We have to control our border. Let's make sure everyone who enters the country does so legally. That's true. So I would differentiate between immigrants and illegal aliens. I don't understand how it is that this administration welcomes in millions of illegal aliens, but puts them as states put them up in hotels, and it's we're going broke over it. Why? These bizarre policies that there's more to it than meets the eye. Here, here. Hi, Mike.
Hey there.
Let me
I can
just see
never
what's.
I never know when you're going to suddenly come on. But apparently, you've been live for 52 minutes. So
Yeah, I was doing a little warm up, um, commentary calls. Also,
oh, great.
I was playing live President Trump's press conference at Mar-a-Lago. I don't know if you know this, but he's doing a live press conference right now.
I did not know that.
Yes, and I have to say that he's on the top of his game. He really is nailing it. If he keeps that up,
What,
then
even more than Biden was on the top of his game?
yeah, even more. Um, if he can just stay into this mode that he is displaying and just stay on the script, if you will, I think he's going to win in a landslide. I mean,
Sounds
it
good to
was,
me. Yeah.
sometimes he goes off on these tangents into areas that I really don't think most people want to hear about or care about. Like, let's not relitigate the 2020 election at this point. If he wins, there'll be plenty of time for that. He needs to focus on stuff that people care about right now. And I think he's doing it. I mean, I think that it's very impressive. Um, I want to, I've kind of enlarged the screen here. Let me just go back to the original. There we go. Wait a minute. I'm fiddling around. Here we go. Okay. Um, yeah, I want to talk about the horse race. We can't talk about the obvious because I'm live streaming on TikTok and YouTube today, which obviously is election
Very
integrity.
daring. Daring, yes.
The what?
That's quite daring.
Yeah, that's why I'm just going to say up front that if you're listening to this program live and you want to get information from my show about quote election integrity unquote and what's going on with that and what happened, go to my Rumble channel, go to my podcast, but I cannot talk about it today. So because we are live on YouTube and it's verboten on YouTube, not to mention on TikTok. So I want to talk a bit about the horse race, so to speak,
All right.
and on where things stand now in terms of President Trump versus Harris, and especially with her pick of Tim Wall.
You mean Tim AWOLs?
Yes, Tampon
Yeah.
Tim. Yeah, okay. Uh, the I mean, I can't imagine a worse choice. I just even historically, usually the nominee chooses a running mate that's sort of more centrist and a little bit of a contrast from them. so you can develop some balance, or at least appears to be a different contrast. I mean, when Kennedy chose Lyndon Johnson, I mean, obviously Johnson is liberal, is probably more liberal than Kennedy, but he wanted to create this kind of contrast between this Eastern Seaboard elitist liberal and a Southerner and a kind of a guy that appears conservative. And it's all, of course, an illusion, but
Yeah.
nevertheless, that's what they do. I mean, that's why Dukakis picked Lloyd Benson, Oil Can Lloyd, and that's why
You
what I mean. It's like
remember all these nicknames. Okay.
right. I mean, or and for that matter, Reagan picked Bush. Eastern Seaboard defeat,
Yeah.
guy. Whereas in the case of Harris, I mean, she's already perceived, and accurately, as probably being the most left-wing major candidate for president in history, probably more to the left than Henry Wallace, who ran in 1944, and who
You're
was
right, because Norman Thomas wasn't a major
right.
party.
Yeah, or like a guy like Eugene V. Debs, who ran from prison.
Yeah.
The point is that given that fact, why would she then go on and pick the guy who let Minneapolis burn after the death of George Floyd? And in spite of being asked to call out the National Guard, even by the left-wing mayor of Minneapolis, and just waited, I think, 4 days, who he's all of his politics have been leftist. I mean, castration for children,
Right.
tampons in the girls in the men's room, you name it. I mean, it's complete cultural Marxism.
Well, I have a theory,
What's that?
um, and we can talk about them dropping Shapiro in a moment. But
Yes. Mm-hmm.
I think you can, make the argument that she was the most left-wing senator. You make a similar argument that he's the most left-wing governor in the United States. I don't think anyone would dispute that.
Right.
And what appears to me to be a throwaway ticket, in that, look, we might as well throw raw meat to all these leftist lunatics in our party.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, you can make sort of an analogy to McGovern. It's not a perfect analogy, but the idea was, look, we're not going to win, so let's go out, and we can always say that we put up this left-wing slate, and maybe with the idea that if we lose, we could say, hey, you know what? We tried it with this crap, didn't work, so we're not going to do this again. But I think it was a throwaway slate. The mere fact that they removed Josh Shapiro,
Mm-hmm.
even after he gave a couple of speeches trying to, so to speak, un-Jew himself as much as he could.
Yes.
It's pretty clear that they're throwing raw meat, and maybe they possibly hope with the raw meat and with fraud they can pull it over the finish line again. But the trouble is that she makes a terrible, terrible impression. He's got so much baggage, it's beyond belief.
Yeah.
And
it's the worst, worst ticket in history.
Yeah, I would say, yeah. I mean,
and the day that he was picked is the day that Trump won. I mean, putting aside the issue of voter integrity, we can talk about that. I mean, I can't imagine, however, Mike, that you're right about this. I don't think that they're planning on losing. I think they're planning on stopping Trump. I think they've been trying to do it for 8 years. And that's why I feel that comes across as sort of a middle of the road moderate, even though he's a man of the left. There's no question about that. But not as radical as she is. I mean, I think he comes from sort of a working class background, and he kind of worked his way up. And he would have been an excellent choice for her. He would have offered balance. Plus, Pennsylvania If they can't win Pennsylvania, they're not going to win. Pennsylvania is the key. It's the Keystone State. And he's won his election with a landslide. He's got control. I'm putting myself in the shoes of the Democrats here. He's got control of the Pennsylvania political machine. And it would have been a competitive ticket if he had been her running mate. And I think he was expecting to be chosen. I think that the two factors that stopped him, first of all, is because he's a Jew, and there is an anti-Semitic strain in the Democratic Party.
About 20 to 30% of the Democrats are violently anti-Semitic.
I agree. And also, he's more than pro-Israel. He actually, after college, he volunteered for the IDF for a year. So, he's trying to get a little, slippery with that, like a typical politician. But that's there. And that's a verboten when you come to the squad on the left, and something like 40% of Democrats polled, are not pro-Israel. So I think that's the first thing. And the second thing is a little bit more fundamental with him, in that he's actually he's a pretty smart guy. I mean, he speaks well, he presents himself well, he knows how to work the room. And that would make Kamala Harris look even worse than she looks now, because
that's a very good point. That's
right?
a very good point.
She's and people are going to say, "Oh, you say this about women. Women are stupid." No, I don't think that's true.
No,
I mean,
that woman is stupid.
I wouldn't say that about Elizabeth Warren. I think she's reprehensible and wrong, and she's not honest. But nobody would ever accuse her of being stupid, right? Or Janet Yellen, or Amy Coney Barrett. We could name other people, women in public life, who conduct themselves with a certain sobriety, whether we agree with them or not. They're perfectly fine. They would have been perfectly fine as presidents. It's not that. It's her. She comes across as a dingbat. She really cannot. I mean, she's worse than Biden, for God's sakes. She can't.
That's a good point, because Biden, you could always say, look, the guy lost a few steps. He's 110 years old. Give him a break.
Mm.
But she doesn't have that. All right. There's no excuses for her. But then doubling back to this, why did they pick Walz? It could be. I mean, I still think it's a throwaway, but let's look at it another way. Maybe they bring in this leftist lunatic to try to light a fire under the leftist lunatic portion of that party to work harder. We've thrown you a bone. Here's your guy. Here's your blood brother. I mean, in that sense, he's perfect, right? Stolen valor, as you mentioned, as the topic of this show.
That's right.
That's perfect. That's a John Kerry thing, in a sense.
Right, the Swift Boat veterans.
Yeah.
Although, I just want to comment on that briefly. First of all, I'm reluctant to criticize any man or woman's military career because I didn't serve in the military, right? I mean, and so and I'm not really criticizing his military career per se. The criticism is that he lied about it after the fact. They say that he got he was going to be deployed to Iraq along with the Minnesota National Guard, and that I heard someone interviewed about this morning. There's a reporter who covered that brigade in Iraq, and he said that it's not like they get a letter immediately and then they have to go. They get a letter like 3 weeks, a month in advance, telling them to get ready because they're going to be deployed. And he resigned. He says that we'd have to see the timeline here, but it seems clear that when he got that letter, he resigned. Now, he didn't do anything illegal, but it's kind of inappropriate because he was in there during peacetime, getting all the benefits. They probably paid for his college education, who knows what else. And then the minute, what hits the fan and you're called into action, he immediately runs. Okay, again, I don't want to criticize. I didn't serve. But the problem is that after the fact, he is then on record going around and talking about his exploits, that he was
Well, he was very clever about it because if you read his official biography, which has just changed, by the way,
Yeah.
he very carefully said his unit served in Iraq.
I see.
Okay,
Leaving the implication that he was with his unit,
exactly.
which of
So
course he was not.
this is reprehensible because here's a guy that's a left-wing commie, but he could kind of sort of put military on his record. Unlike John Kerry, who did serve, did get, let's be honest, a questionable decoration,
Right.
but he was touting that when he first got into politics, that people would think, boy, it's great, he's a war hero, and then he completely changed it. But in the case of Walls, this was just padding his resume in a very cynical manner. Uh, I have no sympathy for him at all. I will criticize it. There's really, fine. He served, quote unquote. Yeah. You know, he was in the unit. He was deployed to Italy to be trained to be a battlefield commander and then ducked out. Okay. So
Yeah,
it's
in a
pretty
way, it's bad because the U.S. government invested heavily in his training and
course.
in needing people in case they were called up, and for him to then simply bug out at the last minute, it's kind of it's really a squandering of American resources. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if he deliberately planned on doing that. Maybe he just maybe he was just scared. I don't know. I mean,
No,
either way, it
I
doesn't look
think
good.
that he was padding his resume.
Yeah.
So you could always say, I was in the military, blah, blah.
He didn't expect a war in Iraq.
Yeah.
And
And
and I'm sure he's not the only one. Again, I feel a little reluctant to criticize that. It's bad, but the real thing for me is that he then traveled around and he lied about it through a lot of weasel language.
well,
And
so did the, what's his face, senator from Connecticut.
oh yeah, well, Bloom, that's an outright lie. He never served at all,
Yeah.
and he claimed to be in Vietnam. I mean, that's stolen valor. I mean, that's flat out. I mean, I think that there are cases of that. There was one here locally in Massachusetts with a local politician who also it was found out that he had never served. And I think that it's not even it's beyond lying. I think that they convinced themselves that they had served. They got so wrapped up in telling a lie or story
Yeah.
that it's like Elizabeth Warren saying that she was a Native American. I mean, they convince themselves of these things. I mean, you know what I mean? You see these things come up, and oh, I'm a Native American. I'm going to go to Harvard and check off a box. And she probably rationalized it at some level in her mind.
Well, here's the other thing. And my friend Steve Malloy now posts every single day where he's debunking this various climate stuff.
Yeah.
And today's was really simple. He brought out data from 1901 July showing that it was cooler than 2024 July. So I sent him an email. I said, isn't it funny that nobody does the work? Nobody. I mean, so these stolen valor people is the same thing. They're counting on the fact that nobody is going to speak up.
Mm.
Because, again, it comes back to one of my favorite themes, because people do not want to believe evil exists. All right.
Well, I think they felt that they had such a locked control. By the way, we should have Malloy on the show if you want to reach out to him.
Yeah.
I think they felt that they had such a lock on the mainstream media.
Yeah.
And when he was first introduced, he was introduced by the Lester Holtz of the world, veteran. They're trying to make him look like he's conservative, right? This white guy with a thick neck, and looks like a classic, conservative kind of a guy. And look at him, he's right. But it doesn't work now because, first of all, there are too many alternative medias, and secondly, Trump and J.D. Vance aren't going to have it. J.D. Vance he's going all over.
Well, he's the real deal. He did serve in Iraq.
He did serve, exactly. And he's all over this thing like white on rice. I mean, he's not going to let up. So he's turning out to be pretty good on that. And they're not going to pull this off. I just don't think that. And meanwhile, they are running this campaign with him now too. I thought maybe they thought he might be good in terms of going out and talking to people. No, he's not talking to anybody. The other day, I mean, he took one question on the tarmac about his stolen valor, and he literally ran. I'm talking
Yeah.
like not sprint, like boom, 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 boom. So they're just going to be, they're doing the same playbook they did with Biden, keeping him in the basement until election day and putting aside the election integrity issues, which are huge. She's not going to answer any questions. She's not going to do any interviews. She's not going to say anything other than reading these banal, silly, comments off of a teleprompter, and she doesn't even do that well.
No.
And that's going to be what they're going to do from now until election day. I understand authority, but I think that somewhere that if anybody wants to interview Kamala Harris, they send them questions in advance and they read off of a page, and she's going to give, like canned answers. She's not going to get any exposure at all because she's a disaster. If
Well,
she's not,
isn't it funny? It's one thing that they put out those rules of engagement, but it's a lot more depressing that the media goes along with them.
the
Right?
media, that's what they're depending on, and that's what they have. Look, I mean, if you in any way questioned the election of 2020, look what happened. Look, I was taken off YouTube. If you're even like mildly conservative, you're a liberal, and you question anything that happened on that election, you're going to lose your job. These people don't have any guts. Either they're in the tank anyway, and they agree to conduct this kind of propaganda, this almost Soviet style, Pravda type media.
Well,
Well, they're
let's take a
afraid.
look
They
at
don't want to lose their careers. It's like
let's
doctors speaking out against the jab. We don't get into that either. But
let's take a look at the motivation, all right, and how sick it really is. And people haven't thought about this. Let's say you were a doctor, and to be part of the establishment, you had to proffer all sorts of fake treatments, and you were killing people, and you knew you were killing people, but to protect your career, you went ahead with it. All right, that would be a tremendous scandal, right? But
right,
now, if you're in the business of dispensing information and you're not doing it, and you're distorting it, and you're lying about it just to keep your stupid media job, what's the point? How do you look at yourself in the mirror? You know?
right.
And by the way, how did that field somehow attract these losers in the first place? Whatever happened to the Seymour Hirsches
Because
and
because they all have to go through schools of journalism now, and schools of journalism are teaching them to be partisans and to be political. It's no longer, I mean, at least they used to give the appearance of going down the middle, right? I mean, I was thinking about this, how brilliant Trump is in terms of like during a debate, he could move his head a certain way and you get all you need to know. He's very adept at television. Peter Jennings, the late Peter Jennings, of the three major anchors, he was probably the most liberal of all of them. But he would play it right down the middle. He never really appeared to take a side, but he'd like move a little eyebrow, when he was talking about something. But the point is that back then they at least made a pretense. Never mind the fact that Walter Cronkite was to the left of Stalin. I mean, according to his own biographer, Douglas Brinkley, who kind of spilled the beans on Cronkite, and that the minute Kennedy was assassinated, he got a call from someone in the deep state who told him that this was a lone nut gunman. He set the narrative. He had a monopoly at the time, and anybody who questioned that would be called a conspiracy theorist and a crazy person. Um, now they are taught to be openly political, that they're advocates, that they're activists.
Well, was that Chuck? What was that a marketing thing? That if you run a totally left wing media, you're going to be sending raw meat every day to whatever percentage of the population is leftist. They know what their market is, so God bless. Because back in the Walter Cronkite era of the 60s,
Mm.
there was not as much available alternative media. So people could delude themselves into thinking that Cronkite was anything other than a left wing guy. And indeed, there was a friend of my parents that knew Cronkite when he was back in radio. And he said the only reason that Cronkite and Murrow succeeded where he didn't, because they were peers, was they both lied through their teeth about how left wing they were. And
Yeah,
were able to.
that's right. Except now it's more out in the open. That's my point. They both
Yeah.
presented themselves as even conservative in a way, and I think that it's that the people that are hired by the big media conglomerates, which are part of the internationalist left. I think that the turning point, and I need to research this a little bit more, but my sense is that the turning point was when Katharine Graham had her husband murdered. Okay. And that was in the late 50s, early 60s. That's when things started to turn in terms of the media really being taken over by the left.
And she got away with that. It was like that was hardly ever looked into, as I recall.
No, I mean, and it was one of those things. I mean, I cover some of this subject in my book about American assassination, where in the case of James Forrestal, the Secretary of Defense, he was clearly given a tab of something in his drink, right? He went to a meeting. He was called an urgent meeting with big insiders, and then suddenly he felt funny. I think probably LSD, who knows? And then he wasn't the same by jumping out the window of the Bethesda Naval Hospital. I think that happened to Katharine Graham's husband also. He suddenly was having severe mental problems for unknown reasons. He had been fine. Then all of a sudden, anyway, big subject. I mean, I'm not really equipped to talk about that today because I need to review some of the things that I've looked into.
I think it all comes down under the category of people just don't think about stuff.
Well, this is why I'm afraid that Kamala Harris might win. Because, it's kind of like the American people, they don't want drama. They want normalcy, to use a word that was coined by Warren G. Harding. Back to normalcy, right? They don't want to think about the government and what they're doing and the economy and World War and the border. They want to think about, and understandably, they want to think about themselves and their family and their job and their life and whether or not they're going to get a new car this year or whether or not they're going to take a vacation on Cape Cod. They don't want to think about the actual national issues. Most people don't want to think about it. They just want everything to be normal, everything to be regular. And that's why that is the biggest calling card that Harris has. If she's elected, nothing will change. And by the way, I would say that if she's elected, I differ here with some people. It's not going to be a huge catastrophe. Nothing will change. It'll be more of a continuation of Biden, of Obama, of Clinton, of the Bushes. These are all controlled, mediocre figureheads who just keep the ball moving along and who gradually preside over this country sinking into becoming a province of the world. That's the establishment.
Yeah, I would agree with you, and I really don't care for the articles, including Victor Davis Hanson and others, that say it's going to be a big catastrophe. No,
I don't think so.
It's the catastrophe is how far left the country has gone since World War II, if you want to talk about a catastrophe. But we've been through bigger catastrophes before. We did, after all, have a civil war. So,
Well, that's the winning card for Harris. Everything is just going to continue the same. Nothing is going to change. And Trump, you know, he has a certain drama. He's been besmirched 8 years with constant attacks. This press conference in Mar-a-Lago, where he did. Mike?
yeah, we lost you for a little while.
Yeah, I'm having some connectivity problems here.
So,
Yeah.
you know, if you want to make a really depressing analogy, look at what's happened to Great Britain over the many years. All right. So it just sort of incrementally gets worse and worse. The people have all these economic problems to deal with. But the point is that they had no choice anyway. If you go back to some of the elections they had in the UK, yeah, everybody talks about Margaret Thatcher, but you can't name a decent politician in that country really for the last 40 years other than her. So
Yeah.
I get it, but I think that it's a concerted effort to keep people on edge to such an extent that they just don't want to think about stuff. Now, guys like you and me, it's almost recreational for us to think about stuff. You know, that's what we do. We don't like having, being told what we have to believe, and maybe it's a gift we have or a curse. But you're right. Look, I could tell you about friends that we have that have had COVID X number of times and still kept up with their 19th vaccination booster.
Yes, exactly.
And these people are not what you would call dumb. All right.
No, they destroyed their immune system in the name of because they want to listen to authority and they want to just get along and they don't question. And I mean, you mentioned Europe. That's a good example. I mean, Great Britain right now, huge immigration of people from Africa and the Middle East. Nobody can stop it. Doesn't matter whether they're Labor or Conservative or Tories or whatever their parties are. It's just reaching a point where there might be no return. It might be too late. Ireland is even worse, apparently. I think in Ireland now, the Irish native population is something like is like 60%, 40% is new arrivals. And if people think that it's racist for me to bring this up, I would point out that it's also a problem with Ukrainians who are white. Inundating Ireland. It's not necessarily just Africans and people from the Middle East. The point I'm making is that it is a different culture. They are being given preferential treatment, and that Ireland is no longer going to be Irish after a while. And it may be too late because once you get the ball rolling like that.
Well, Ireland has a small population, so I believe it is too late.
Probably is. Ireland is gone. They might as well even change the name of the country at this point.
And well, but here again.
And by the way, native Irish are leaving.
Yeah. Here again, it comes down to people just not thinking about anything. All right.
Right.
I was told, you were told, everybody was told how Catholic a country Ireland was.
Yeah. How is that
being true in the 1970s? But it was a cliche because when I've got to tell you, I almost partially believed this myself. And it was in the 90s, I believe. I went to a mass at the main cathedral in Dublin. There was nobody there. It was a Sunday mass.
Wow.
So I'm thinking, wait a minute, where is this cliche coming from? But then there's all these cliches that people don't think of. And the one currently in vogue is, as you mentioned earlier, when they're trying to build up Tim Walz to get his conservative bona fides. Wow, the military is conservative. Military hasn't been conservative since, I don't know, World War One.
Yeah. Since they got rid of MacArthur.
Yeah.
I don't know, or whatever. Yeah. I'm not sure, but yes, you're right. I mean, and Mark Milley, I mean, for God's sakes, please. You know,
Yeah.
they're
So people, again, I throw down the challenge to the viewers here. You got to think about stuff, and then it becomes sort of fun. So I was talking to my son the other day, and we're just looking at stuff that, quote, doesn't make sense. Okay. And my favorite example is the Manson gang. All right. Now, why do I say that? Okay. How do you take, and I vaguely knew her, she went to my high school, Patty Krenwinkel, who was this quiet, druggy girl in the high school.
wasn't
How did
she
she
in
turn in?
the Manson family, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
How
Okay.
did she turn into a bloodthirsty killer? All right. Consider this. What if the CIA was trying to develop little ground troops and they knew of Charlie Manson? He was well known in that part of LA for many years as having this cult. What if they say, you know, we could take this guy and use him as an assassination squad? And so he gives these girls some sort of drugs provided by the CIA that turns little Patty Krenwinkel into a vicious killer. But then when they realize, hey, this guy is such a lunatic that we won't be able to control him, they just sort of walk away. I mean, interesting theory. Obviously, I can't prove it.
No, but
But
there's some backing to that. I mean, who was it? The late Arthur McGowan, I believe his name was, did some cutting edge research on this and the background of the Manson family and their connections to government. And, you know, the Jolion West, who was a CIA psychiatrist in the early 60s and who introduced LSD to the streets, and people like Ram Dass and Timothy Leary. These are all CIA front people.
right.
And a lot of the this same author, I should get, I have to do some deeper dive here as well, but he knows that some of the same kind of alternative musicians of the 60s were very connected to the CIA, including and especially the Grateful Dead. Jim Morrison's father was a high-level intelligence officer.
Yes.
David
Yeah.
Crosby from Crosby, Stills and Nash. I mean, a lot of these guys came from military families that had connection to what we call the deep state. I mean, the Beatles, right? The Tavistock Institute. I'm just saying that, again, I don't, you know, these are wild speculations.
But it's fun to think of, though.
It is.
It's an alternative view of history, a la your very difficult to contact buddy, Michael Flores. Who,
I'd like to reach him. Yeah, he's excellent. I just don't know how to get to him.
Well, I mean, but what these guys do is that they take a look at an issue that, quote, doesn't make sense. And you start from there and you start thinking about, why is this the conventional narrative or whatever it is, right? And that's how I got into this Manson thing with my son. I mean, I another story I had when I was in the music industry.
Right.
I was working with this guy who called himself Fred Rain, deceased now. His real name was Fred Trujillo. And he was sort of a journeyman musical artist that, among other things, would play a bunch of clubs in what is now called Simi Valley, California, but was then Santa Susana, not terribly far from where I live, actually. And he said one day, and he tells this story, and it was so eerie. You know, he said one day he's playing in his bar, and what he described as this, quote, Buffalo Bill looking guy, little short guy, comes walking in. And he said it was a really kind of a rough night with putting up with the audience. And this Buffalo Bill guy says, "Can you play so and so?" And Fred says, maybe we'll get to that in the next set. I don't know. And then the Buffalo Bill guy leaves. Bartender comes to him and said, "Do you know who that guy was? You don't talk back to that guy." Of course, it was Charlie Manson, right?
Mhm.
And he already had a reputation of people mysteriously dying, How he
Right.
took over the Spawn movie ranch, never really been explained. So there are these questions that come out. And
Yeah, I mean,
it's
even like right now, I have this book called Astral Weeks that's about Boston in 1967, 68 actually,
yeah,
and how Van Morrison was here. He recorded his album Astral Weeks, which is a great album, by the way, completely acoustic, totally a non-electric album, one of his best. But it talks about some of the kind of the underground, the mob connections there, and there's a lot of interaction with the Boston mob scene and him. And then there was the Fort Hill Faggots for Freedom, which was a cult that was up on the top of Fort Hill. Apparently, they're still there. But the head of it, this guy, Mel Lyman, was a real bastard. I mean, he was sort of like a Charles Manson-like figure. And he was like, I'm the Messiah. And it was, I mean, and he was, totally all over connections to high-level people. And, this was going on all over the country at the time. It was a deliberate and conscious attempt to change the culture, make people more docile. I don't know. I mean, I have no idea what the agenda was, but certainly to undermine conventional notions of morality, right? With that, I think it is clear. And how did we get on this? This is
well, I
great.
know. I think this was just one of my favorite topics, that you have to look at the revealed wisdom of whatever it is
Yeah,
and start sort of thinking about it. Now, this was, a big deal back in the 60s with the JFK assassination. How does some loser plan this thing and he's the lone gunman and whatever? But what's changed? In the Trump assassination attempt, here's some loser, quote, lone gunman.
right. The same narrative.
Yeah.
And this one, I mean, I think that in a way, it shows how that in a positive sense, it makes me feel better to know that there is so much exposure of this now that they can't get away with the lone nut gunman theory. I mean, there's just too many people were holding up cell phones. Too many people are now aware of what the hell is going on in the world. There's been too many people who have woken up for them to pull that kind of crap anymore.
In the good sense of woke. Yeah.
Exactly. And I use the word awakened
Yeah.
as a more accurate description. And they just can't pull something like that off in the same way that they did. And I think that in the case of the attempted assassination, obviously, it seems to me they wanted to kill Trump and they failed. And God forbid they try again. I don't know. I mean, but that led directly to the coup against Biden. Had that not happened and had Trump been killed, Biden would have been breezing along right now.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, this was, even Biden himself admitted this in his phone call to Trump. He said, "Oh, I guess you moved your head the right way." I mean, how did he know that? This was like shortly after the shooting. I mean, before this was known.
Well,
Um,
people, there's a couple of things going on. One is, everybody has a cell phone camera. So you can't really hide this stuff
that's right.
as easy as you could back in the day. But on the other hand, you still have the basic human discomfort with dealing with evil. You just
Right.
rather
But
not.
even the normies weren't buying that argument, from the
Well,
officials.
I certainly hope you're right, but try having a conversation with someone in my generation or maybe a little older about how Roosevelt knew about Pearl Harbor. Try having that conversation. You know?
Right. Forget it. Although that was somewhat out in the open. I mean, I think it was McCormick at the Chicago Tribune who covered that and
Yeah.
did so quite openly. There was
Well, the Tribune was one of the few papers in the U.S. that hated FDR.
right.
But I mean, saying that there was at least one. Now, with them all being in the tank for the Democrats, you wouldn't have that coverage. But I guess the good news is that there's all this alternative media now, so maybe it doesn't matter as much.
Although, I mean, they are still trying to do it. I mean, there's this recent expose about Google. If you put in the word Trump, usually there's an algorithm where it calls up different sites. You put in the name Trump or Donald J. Trump, you get Kamala Harris.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
mean, obviously someone is manipulating the algorithm.
Well, let's
Right?
let's talk about that because it's another favorite topic, right? And I've gotten people to their heads would explode with this one. 1996. In previous years on the internet, people were using web crawler, Excite, some of these
Mhm.
other search engines. All right,
Right.
now, listen to this. 1996, this company comes along called Google, founded by these two nerds from Stanford. Now they roll out a search engine from the get-go that's fast as hell, that works better than the others. All right, so just put this together. Even if you had unlimited money, how do you get all the data centers together so quickly to do this? It's not possible unless you're already using data centers from then, the people that were the big data people only in those days, the government.
Right. The NARPO was it, and then they
Well, not only
competed.
that, it's Social Security, whatever. All right.
Yeah.
So
Hmm.
there's no doubt in my mind that the government, deep state, if you will, is behind Google.
Oh yeah.
You can't
No.
convince me
In fact,
otherwise.
I think openly. I mean, the Google is the primary cloud storage for the Defense Department.
Yeah.
They have that huge facility off the coast in San Francisco that nobody can go near.
Right.
I
But my
mean,
point is, Chuck, that when two kids from Stanford started this, they didn't have all these data centers.
right.
So where did it all come from? Again, people never ask about that. How do you go from
And
0 to 60?
this is the most insidious world control thing around. I mean, they're manipulating not just elections, but politics, culture, economy in countries all over the world. I mean, with their algorithm. I mean, it's only human nature that when you put something in the server, you look at the first two or three things that come up as being the most legitimate things. And they can make it so that you don't come up until the seventh or eighth line. It's not outright censorship, but it's effective censorship. And
Yeah.
it could change millions of votes in an election. And they're already doing it now. They're doing it to Trump as we speak. Now, apparently, I just heard that iconic picture of Donald Trump standing up after the bullet hit his ear and saying fight, fight, and waving his fist. It was censored from the internet. It was censored from Facebook. Turned out that once Trump found out, Mark Zuckerberg personally called him and apologized. But how did it happen? Who did this? It's still happening at Twitter also, even though Musk has done a good job there.
Well, the reason it's happening at Facebook and Twitter, it's different reasons. Zuckerberg is left wing, of course.
Right.
Twitter or X, that's not the case. But
But he's still
it's
left
the
in place. People are
old
chatting.
management problem. The old management problem. If something's rotten in the state of Denmark, you got to nuke the whole thing because there's going to be bad actors there And I can tell you this as a small business owner, that the only way to change the culture, and it was a small company, you had to bite the bullet and get rid of everyone because there were just remnants of the wrong stuff that were there. It wasn't political in this case, but it was the wrong methods of doing things, wrong methods of record keeping, and so on. And you can't train that away, all right? Because I remember vividly, there'd be times we would bring back employees because we were desperate to get some work done. And the first thing you would hear, well, we never used to do it this way. And so this is unfortunately what Musk ran into. He
Right.
couldn't topple the whole thing.
No, I mean,
So-
he did a lot though. He laid off
Yeah.
something like 75% of the company.
Well, that was another matter because there was so much redundancy.
Sure.
But the inherent censorship culture still exists to some extent.
It does. It's improved, but it does. And this is what we're now dealing with in the world. I mean, this is probably the biggest story of all. That what we perceive is controlled. What we get, the information we get, in other words, whoever has their hand on controlling that controls our minds.
Yeah.
Because we can only go by what the information that we receive. And if somebody's deciding what that is, this is why our children are now all non-binary. I mean, it's because that's what it's being fed to them through these engines. It's an agenda.
But where is the critical thinking skill? I realize there's going to be a large percentage of people that do what they're told, believe what they're told to believe. But what about the rest of us? You know, are we so disempowered that it just comes over us like a steamroller? Maybe that's the idea.
I don't know. Maybe we're just getting tired. I mean, I hate to bring up another topic, and again, I want to be careful here on YouTube, but I wonder how much the jab might have affected our minds and our physicals. I wonder about myself having had that. Sometimes I'm thinking, well, how am I being affected? Has it affected my cognitive ability? I think it might have. I don't feel the energy I had. I don't feel the concentration that I had. And I don't think it's because I'm getting older. That might be part of it. But
Well, certainly, if you change the paradigm, and no one is going to dispute this, where the paradigm used to be, I'll take a weakened or killed virus and inject it in you and develop an immune response. But now, if I'm giving you messenger RNA, who the hell knows what protein or proteins?
yeah, the spike protein.
Yeah.
And what is that doing to the sequence of the cells?
Yeah.
You know, when you have this genetically tampered with RNA, mRNA attaching itself to your DNA, what is that doing? They don't know. They just went ahead, or maybe they do know. I don't
Well, no,
want
I
to
think
let's
that
not
you
be
know.
careful here because we're on YouTube. But
Yeah.
yeah, this is one of these forbidden subjects.
Yeah, I mean, you can think of this might be a vector to, let's say, introduce whatever and leave it at that.
Right.
But it's certainly a fact that over the last couple of days, the CDC again changed the definition of vaccine.
Exactly. They now, 2 years later, they're actually now admit that this thing was horrible. It was a disaster. Again, I want to be careful here, but it did nothing to in terms of the virus that really could have been managed with certain, let's just say, medications that are well FDA approved, but we're not going to mention the names of those that have been used for decades successfully to treat viruses. That was taken off the table, and instead we got this experimental jab. I don't want to go to again. Let's get.
No,
back.
but let me pivot to what's
Yeah.
going on with that in a non-harmful way. That the mode now seems to be, not for all of them, but for many of them, this sort of prodigal son approach. Well, I'm sorry I did this, and I shouldn't have had the lockdowns. And there's been numerous politicians, and they're misusing the parable of the prodigal son. Okay, the prodigal son
Mike, I think
admitted the prodigal son admitted that he was wrong.
right.
He
Well,
never particularly did evil.
if they want to admit that they're wrong and they want to show some level of actual repentance,
Yeah,
fine. I say we should have the Japanese approach on that. They should say it and then take out a sword and thrust it into their belly. Right? I mean, this is what happened at the end of World War II. A lot of the Japanese generals stood up on public, I don't know if they did on television, and they committed harikiri after apologizing to the Japanese people. In fact, Tojo, the dictator of Japan, he tried to do it and he failed. He didn't kill himself.
yeah.
But that's what they should. If they're really, I remember. I don't know why I think this. Bill Clinton, after the Lewinsky thing and after all these lawsuits, he went on like an apology tour, and the media's like, he's repentant, he's apologizing, let's move on.
Yeah, well, what penance did he do?
Well, the point is that, sure, this is actually quite Jewish. Get up and apologize, get up and show repentance, and then resign.
Yeah.
You have to, in other words, the whole idea in a way of like Rosh Hashanah, when you're supposed to confess your sins to people. I mean, it's a very practical thing. You're supposed to go to the person or the group that you committed the offense, acknowledge your crime, ask for forgiveness, and once if you receive forgiveness, then you're supposed to do something.
We're supposed to make restitution.
Yeah, you give them money, or you go to jail, or you submit to the authorities, or there's a price to be paid. It's not enough to just say, I'm sorry, mea culpa, mea maxima culpa.
Well, that was the Richard Nixon thing. Remember, I'll take the responsibility, but not the blame. And yeah, it's really a misuse of what's supposed to be penitence.
Yeah, I mean, this is a weird like sidebar here, but I mean, I saw a short interview with Paul McCartney, right? And he was talking about his most famous song, Yesterday.
Yeah.
And he said that there's a line in that song where he says, I said something wrong, now I long for yesterday. Right. And he points out that several very famous singers like Sinatra and Ray Charles and others, they recorded that song, but they added a little lyric. Instead of saying, I said something wrong, they added, I must have said something wrong.
Yeah.
In other words, they changed the meaning. They weren't owning it. It's like, no, I didn't. I must have. I didn't know. I don't know what I said. Maybe I said something wrong. But that kind of describes the ethos here. There's no responsibility. It's not like I said something wrong. It's like, hey, maybe I must have said. I don't know what it is. Maybe I did. Maybe I didn't. Anyway.
Well, a good example of that was the Secretary of Defense, remember? When he was cornered saying, all right, if some enlisted guy went AWOL to the extent that no one knew where he was for 3 days, what would happen to him? He'd be in the brig.
Right.
So what about you, buddy? And he didn't own it. I mean, talk about a DEI hire.
Yeah, well, we something, they used to be proud of DEI hires, right? I mean, Biden bragged, I'm going to hire a black woman. I'm going to bring in a black woman as my running mate. And because I want equity, I want inclusion. Now, if you say that, you're like, that's a no-no to bring that one up.
Well, it's not a no-no for you and me, but.
So, Mike, what do you have coming up?
All right, I had a couple of pieces that appeared on the Olympics in the last few days. And the first one, I think I discussed earlier, that we talked about the sort of pagan nature of this thing.
Yes.
And then I expanded it, where we have this absurd situation where this genetically dubious woman is beating the crap out of female boxers.
Oh, it's horrible.
And I got a lot of flack on that for people saying, well, they don't believe the genetic test, that it was rigged, uh, and which I counter that
Yeah,
if
but
we
that's a
get to the
bunch of
point,
BS. Everybody knew that that was a man.
of course,
You could
of
tell by
course,
looking at his shorts, okay? I
yeah.
mean, anybody, I mean, and to have him go into the ring and hit a woman in the head like that to me, 20 years ago, that would have been, you're beating up a girl. I
Well, you're
mean,
beating up a girl, but consider this now became a sport. A guy beating up a girl is a sport that's televised internationally. All right. Why? And because I got a lot of surprise email, because feminists hate women. Duh.
no kidding.
Okay. That's where it came from. And then I said, and okay, let's assume fine. This guy's got genetic issues, whatever it is. Why, considering he would have an advantage in essentially any sport against women, why did he pick the one sport where you could beat the crap out of them?
I don't buy the business of genetic issues anyways. Either you're a man or you're a woman. I know that's politically incorrect to say that, but to my way of thinking, I saw again today some reference, I forget what I was reading, to somebody saying that they had been assigned at birth,
All right.
the female. Who assigned them? I mean, really? It's like this is almost cruel. And the usual argument that they make is, well, you have some people, probably like less than a fraction of a percentage, like 0.0001, that very well may be what we used to call, I think the medical term for it was hermaphrodite. You have both
Right.
male and female sexual organs. But the point, even then, is that that person is still either male or female. You can't be both and you can't be neither. They might have elements of each, but one of those aspects is the one that's favored. And if someone traditionally had a child which exhibited that, the parents would try to make a decision based on observation in terms of
Right.
which sex they were, and that was the humane thing to do. It is inhumane to say that they're neither. It's actually cruel. It's everyone is either male or female, and my basic proof to that is that if you can be both, then you can impregnate yourself, and that's not possible. You have to be one or the other. You can't have both a uterus and a penis. You have to have one or the other. You might have elements of each, but
Well, here
ultimately,
is the problem that arises. Okay. There are sports which will naturally favor, for lack of a better term, freaks of one kind or another. All right. Every single female gymnast, in fact, male gymnasts, are very small, highly muscled, do not look what you and I would call normal.
right.
So they gravitate to these particular sports. Now, how far does that line of reasoning have to go before you're back in the battle days of the East Germans, where they would take these young girls and pump them full of hormones to turn them into the closest thing to a man yet appearing as a woman, and they'd win in primarily sport, swimming and track events. So there's a long, sordid history
And a
of
very inhumane one and very cruel.
yeah,
This is like it should be seen as a violation of the most basic human rights. And also, when you talk about freaks, and I don't, we're using that word not in a mean way. Back in the 1960s and right up till I think the late 60s, there used to be this thing called the freak show.
right.
In fact, in Florida, there was actually a town where a lot of them lived, and there was nothing wrong with it. They
Yeah.
made some of them had fabulous livings. There was Lobster Man with the hands that looked like lobsters, the bearded lady. There was all this stuff. I mean, I knew that a woman in my own life during the pandemic, she developed a lot of facial hair. I'm like, if you keep that up, we're going to sell tickets. I mean, it's like, but the point is that they made a living and they were fine until it
Well,
became.
and then what came out of that when they started, to end these freak shows, uh, the reaction from the quote freak community was very negative because at least they were making a living doing
Yeah, they
this.
lost their careers and their jobs. People, in some cases, they had whole families. They made a living on this, and it was like all of a sudden it became taboo. I think there was some do-gooder. I don't know the history. I should look into this. Who came along and basically had the whole thing banned. And I mean, what am I getting at here? Maybe people who want to compete in that way, there could be a special designation for that. Not the Olympics. You know, it's it should be male and female. I mean, I'm sorry, but that's nature. And this whole thing is an agenda.
Well, it is an agenda, and there's unfortunately in the sports media, there's a lot of apologists for this. Uh, and well, I mean, people have to realize, first of all, journalists are very dumb. I've worked with them for decades, and the ones in sports are even dumber. But they seem to lop onto this that we can't discriminate against this individual, and so on and so forth. Uh, Not caring apparently that they're ruining the idea of sports competition with this sort of thing.
Right.
It's just going
And they're
to
eliminating the category of women, basically, more women than men. But
with the full faith and credit, by the way, of many women.
oh yeah, well that's as you say, feminists hate women in the same way that gays hate gay people by, during AIDS they didn't want to close their bathhouses. Never mind the fact that tens of thousands of gay men died horrible, painful, miserable deaths because it was a disease, and if it was treated like a disease, it would. But they didn't want to sacrifice or in any way, compromise their sexual revolution. That was the important thing to them, not someone's life, not someone's welfare. That's all they cared about. That's all Barney Frank cared about. And I brought this up when I ran against him, and he said, "Oh, Chuck is crazy. Don't listen to Chuck."
Yeah.
He could have said something he was a leader of the gay community. He could have said something that would have saved lives instead of promoting the sexual revolution and attacking anybody who pointed out the obvious. Anyway, so
Like we said, you got to think about stuff.
yes, on that note, we shall reconvene next week, and God willing, President Trump stays safe and stays out of harm's way, because these are very dangerous times for him and for the country. So,
agreed. And at some point, there's going to be the spotlight on Harris and AWOLs. They won't be able to hide.
And at some point, she's going to have to be smoked out and interviewed. And it's going to be like Biden at that debate. And that's why they're not doing it. But they're not going to get away with it. Not this time.
I mean, come on, that Philadelphia rally. Did you see how it began?
Yeah, they had some.
Hello, like 8 or 9 times. She couldn't think of what to say.
She's about as, I'm sorry to be insulting here, but she's about as intelligent as a turnip, and they know it. And I know that the rally they just did in Wisconsin, they had this local folk band that's hugely popular there give a free concert. They did the same thing in Atlanta. They have somebody give a free concert, so everybody went. I mean, it's really, I don't know if they're going to get away with that. And the media's lying about that. Oh, look at this. There's momentum. Bull crap. Anyway. All right.
Well, enjoy. And we will reconvene next time.
Take care.